Not everything can be explained. Are you ready for some real-life ghost encounters? Story 1. My parents, only just recently, told me a story about something that happened when I was around 2 years old. When I was around 2 years old, I would often say, "Our neighbor's mother will come by soon," whilst playing in the living room. I would say it during random moments, on random days of the week. This went on for about a year or so, and once during that year, my mother, a bit creeped out at that point, would ask me, "Why is she coming by?" To which I would respond with, "She is angry." What neither me nor my parents knew at that time was that our neighbor's mother had actually passed away not long before that. I don't actually remember this myself, but rather because of my parents who told me this story. They have certainly not forgotten what happened in that year. Story 2. Happy haunting. Saw my deceased friend on night shift at work. Saw my deceased friend and colleague, nurse, at work one night shift. I had a wonderful, kind friend who I worked with for a few years at a large hospital in San Diego. She loved her job and came to work with a big smile each night shift, often in pink scrubs and a high ponytail. She was a joy to be around and sadly diagnosed with leukemia and passed away 2 years later. About 6 months after she passed, I was walking down the hall of the hospital unit we worked on. It's probably between 0100 0400 a.m., and I would often walk the halls to get some exercise and stay awake. When my friend was alive, she would sometimes take a nap in an empty patient room on her lunch break. As I walked that night, I passed by an unoccupied patient room, and as I passed the door, realized that a woman was actually inside the room sitting on the hospital bed wearing pink. It took me a second to register that, but knowing that there should not be a person in that room, I walked back to check out the room, and for the briefest moment, saw that it was her, sitting on the side of the hospital bed in pink scrubs, ponytail, big smile on her face as if to say, "Hey, just checking on you all and hoping the night is going smooth." Now, I called out her name, and then she was gone. I immediately started to cry and rushed to the nurse's station and told my colleagues. They all thought it was her, and that of course she would show up at work, because she truly loved it. This was honestly reassuring to me and I think to my colleagues, because we knew how much she missed work in the 2 years she was ill and unable to be there. This is a happy haunting and cemented in my mind that there is another realm we just don't understand. Story 3. Ghost Bride. In 2023, I was at my cousin's house, where an evangelical cell was taking place, with several children. We decided to play hide-and-seek in the dark. After 3 rounds, we gathered in a room, laughing and talking. That's when I suddenly looked at the door and saw a bride walking by. Her dress was stained with red dirt and some dark stains, and she had a veil covering her face. As soon as I saw it, it disappeared. I never saw her again at that moment. Anyway, the following year, in 2024, I started seeing her in the school hallways, as if she were watching me. Over Labor Day weekend, I was watching Amityville, The Awakening, when I started hearing a strange noise, as if the earth was being turned over. I was in my mother's room. Eerie. Scared, I ran to the kitchen and stayed there, on a call with a friend, for about 40 minutes. When I came back, I finished the film, but the restless feeling didn't go away, and I went to sleep and had a strange nightmare. I dreamed that I was in my city's cemetery, but it looked like it was from the 90s. I was barefoot, stepping on the red earth, and I witnessed a burial. When I woke up, my feet were covered in red dirt. I washed them, went to bed again, and when I fell asleep, I dreamed of an old house and 2 children playing on a swing. This event continued to disturb me. I later discovered that, in my city, a bride threw herself onto the train tracks on her wedding day. After losing emotional control, she was a train driver. The last time I saw this apparition was in December 2024, at my bedroom door. Motel room in Serbia. I have kept this story mostly to myself because I'm not much of a believer, have become more of a believer in the past year, and still to this day, I don't know if I believe what I saw, but maybe somebody has had a similar experience, so please tell me if you have. I was born and raised in Denmark, but I originate from Macedonia, and my whole childhood we mostly visited Macedonia by car, rarely by plane, which is a 2-day trip. We always either ended up sleeping in Hungary or Serbia. My parents always preferred to spend the night in Subotica, Serbia, the first city after the Hungarian-Serbian border, because many travelers had had bad experiences, including my grandparents, with robbery in that region of Hungary. I was about 8/9 when this happened. We got to a motel in Subotica, don't know which one, and we got 2 rooms. My brother shared the room with my father, and I shared it with my mother. The motel room was pretty standard, Right to the entrance was the bathroom, and the entire wall on the left of the entrance had wardrobes, drawers, and in between those there was a table with a mirror above it. There was two twin beds, which I didn't like, because when I was a kid, I couldn't sleep without feeling that there was a person behind my back as I sleep on the side. I used to sleep in my brother's room, even though I had my own room. My mom slept on the bed closest to the entrance, and I slept closest to the windows. As I said, I couldn't fall asleep because I was scared to turn my back to the open. So I was just laying there on my back, listening to my mom snoring. I was awake for a long time trying to fall asleep on my back, and at one point I heard a crack near the entrance, but I calmed myself down because it's old furniture and it cracks. Plus, that often happens at home too, but then the drawer closer to the beds, on the left of the mirror, cracked even louder than the one at the entrance. At this point, I was really scared. I probably stopped breathing to hear if anything else would happen. I always hold my breath when I am scared and focusing at the same time, but it was quiet. Instead, I see a silhouette in the mirror, not on our side but inside the mirror, pass slowly. It was like gray smoke. It went from left to right, and when it went out of frame, it was very quiet for a couple of seconds. Then the wardrobe on the right side of the mirror made a loud bang, as if someone punched it with all of their force. I was really scared, and I didn't move nor close my eyes. I just stared at the wall for hours before I eventually fell asleep. You might wonder why I didn't wake my mom or start screaming. And to tell you the truth, I don't know either. My parents always told me ghosts aren't real, so I am guessing that was the reason, because I am mostly scared of not being believed, which is also the reason I haven't spoken about this to many people. And another reason was also that I am a boy, and when I was little I had been told to man up a lot, lol, so I didn't want to show a sign of weakness, and yet another reason was probably also the fact that I was too scared to move or do anything. I froze completely. Today, I wish I had said something to my mom. As a kid, I thought that both my parents didn't believe in the paranormal, but now I know that my mom does. My dad doesn't. Sad. So in recent years, I told her, and she said that I should have woken her up, but she also said that I was a kid, implying that I don't remember the situation that well. I have also told my brother about this, and he believes what I saw, but he thinks that it was my mind playing tricks because I was scared, which is a possibility. Another possibility I thought of was that I had sleep paralysis, but that was an ongoing theory of mine up until the point I actually experienced sleep paralysis. And it wasn't the same as the time in Serbia. In Serbia, I was wide awake the entire time. I never fell asleep prior to the event with the silhouette. I have had other creepy encounters, but for all of them, I always thought of a rational explanation. This one just bugs me, because I don't know what to make of it. After my experience with sleep paralysis, I have started to believe a bit more in this stuff, not because of the sleep paralysis itself, but because I know that the encounter in Serbia wasn't sleep paralysis. I am posting this here, assuming and hoping you believe me, and if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. And please tell me what it could have been, or if you have had anything similar happen to you. By the way, English is my third language, so if you find any sentences to be too complicated, that would be the reason. Again, I am happy to answer any question. Story 5. Spirit Box? I was doing cash cart yesterday and something strange happened. I had my walkie on channel 4 instead of 3 like we are supposed to, and someone said my full first name on the walkie. I walked to the drive-through window and asked them what they needed, but they told me nobody called that. At first I thought they was just playing, then I noticed I was on channel 4 instead of 3. Also, I just moved to this area so nobody knows my name besides the crew. Can someone give me an explanation? Bed shaking. 7 years ago, I had an experience that I still struggle to explain. At the time, I was 13 years old, living in a Victorian house built in 1891. The history of this house is unknown. I have checked national archives, newspapers, and even photographs, but haven't found much. What I do know is that it was part of an old mining town, Serene or Purine, Colorado. I have always been someone who believes in science and rational explanations, and I was never the type to attribute strange occurrences to the paranormal. Despite my skepticism, something happened that night that I still cannot logically explain. This occurred sometime between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. while I was in bed. I had just closed my eyes and was still fully awake and aware of my surroundings. My cat, Nyla, was lying on my chest. Suddenly, my bed began shaking. Eerist. It felt as if someone sat down and started rocking back and forth rapidly. This was happening for 15 to 20 seconds, and my cat immediately freaked out. As someone who always looked for rational explanations first, I initially assumed this was caused by the house shifting, and have thought that for many years. There were even cracks in the walls which you could even see outside, if you looked hard enough. I went to bed after and just brushed it off as exactly that. However, after thinking back and analyzing the physics of house movements, I realized over time that this explanation doesn't hold up, and here's why. Houses don't shift in a way that causes a single object to shake violently. The shifting, if that is what it was, likely came from the floor itself, which would vibrate to other parts of the room. Instead, the shaking was isolated to my bed. I had items on dressers and shelves, and none of them fell or even shifted. Also, the duration of shaking was too long for structural shifting. Most house settling occurs in quick shifts, not sustained movement for a quarter of a minute. Also, my headboard is an old, heavy wooden piece, not attached to the wall. Normally, if I even sat down on the bed, it would creak or shift slightly, but during this, it made no noise at all. My cat reacted, meaning it was external. If this was sleep paralysis, a dream, or some sort of mental perception, my cat would have not noticed anything. The closest train track to my home is about a mile away and hasn't been used in years, like 50 plus years if that. I live in Colorado, and we do get very minor earthquakes. However, I even checked if one occurred, and it didn't. Also, it was around 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. There was no construction or anything of that matter going on nearby. I also think maybe it could have been the washer or dryer, but then again, they weren't being used and they were downstairs. My room was on the second floor, essentially on the opposite side of the house. So, this rules out all explanations of anything other than paranormal. After this occurrence, I never noticed anything strange afterward. But also, I was so in denial about anything spiritual, so looking back, I'm sure things were going decently unnoticed. Any thoughts on what this might have been? Story 7. Long-term shared personal encounter with being or beings. I want help. When I was about 8 years old, I moved from the Boston area to live with my mom in Virginia. She had recently bought a house that was built in the early 20th century. In the house, it was me, my mom, and my mom's new husband. The house had 2 floors, an attic and a basement, a front porch and a large yard. There were 3 main entrances: back door to the yard, side door to driveway made of small stones, and the front door to the porch. Needless to say, there were a lot of moving parts, so to speak, within the home. The first encounter was a shared one between me and my mom. You see, my mom's new husband was in the military and was deployed to Iraq shortly after moving to the house, so it was just me and my pregnant mom. One night, around 8 or 9 p.m., me and my mom were in the living room together when we both darted our attention to the stairs directly behind us. The sound of footsteps going quickly up the stairs startled us. My mom, being Mama Bear, took off after the presumed person as I started panicking, thinking someone broke into our house, but I followed her up the stairs. As my mom approached her room, the door slammed in her face. She told me to go downstairs and call the police, which I did. Eventually, they came as my mom watched the door in complete, stunned silence. After a while, they swept the house only to find nothing. Now, not an open window, nothing stolen, and most importantly, not a single unlocked door, except the side door which we opened for the police. They told us they didn't find anything unusual and left. Me and my mom, left in disbelief, didn't really know what to do except go to bed. After a while, I think we both kind of forgot that it happened. That's the thing about these encounters. They are sporadic and sometimes very minuscule life. A faint sound of someone walking, or just the sense of presence. The small things happened sporadically for years, but things really began to build up in my teenage years. As I got older, I got used to the eeriness of the house, but in some way it felt comforting or protective. However, that would change one day when I was 16 years old. I remember my mom and her husband were fighting all night, but sometime after everyone had gone to bed, I was in my room playing video games when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I went into the kitchen thinking maybe someone dropped something. The kitchen counter was covered in beer bottles, but there on the floor was a shattered beer bottle. I stopped for a second, and it was in that moment that I felt a heaviness, like someone grabbed my entire soul and was crushing it slowly. There was no one in the kitchen except me. I thought to myself, there's nothing here, and I have to clean this. I went to grab the broom and came back. When I got back to the kitchen, the open laptop on the dining room table started playing some weird Russian music on YouTube. I know it sounds stupid, but to this day, that was the most frightening thing I've ever felt in my entire life. Music playing from a laptop. Music that no one in my house would listen to. I stood still for what felt like an eternity, as the feeling of heaviness turned into a cold emptiness, like I was hungry and alone. I had to be brave though, I thought to myself, so I went to go turn the music off, when another beer bottle fell off the counter. I, again, stopped. I remember saying, "Hello? 50. There was no reply. I then remember saying, "Can I help you in any way?" In that moment, every odd, aching feeling suddenly reversed into the feeling of a weight being lifted off my shoulders. I waited a moment, turned off the music, and went to bed, leaving the second shattered beer bottle on the floor. I never talked to my mom about this, And a couple months later, I got kicked out of my house and went to live with a friend. When I turned 18, I moved back to the Boston area. I'm writing this now at 24 because I was talking to my mom recently and she told me some interesting stuff about the house. So, like myself, my mom has experienced numerous encounters and feelings in that house. We both agree that we never have felt it anywhere else. In fact, we both are very skeptical about ghosts. My mom told me that everyone that has ever been in that house has felt or experienced something. My mom also told me that after some digging, she found out no one would buy that house because they all thought it to be haunted. After even further digging, my mom found out the house used to be an office where seances were held, and that a medium had lived and worked there before her. Me and my mom both agree that when things became unstable in the household, the presence of the ghost became more prevalent. However, my mom claims she feels connected to it. Despite being spiritual herself, she claims it protects her and she feels like it is trying to tell her something often. She began telling me all this now because she has had many encounters recently and wanted my opinion or experiences on the house. I obviously didn't list all of the numerous encounters I had over the years, but I'm posting this because I want to know if anyone has any input. Me and my mom are both still skeptical of ghosts, but we want to know if there's a reason for this malicious and protective dichotomy of the presence. Any help would be appreciated. We want an explanation for our shared experiences. Story 8. The Farmhouse. I know the title sounds funny, but I'll give you some context to understand. My family owns a generational farm from very long ago, probably since the late 1800s. On this farm, there is a very old house that has been on the farm way longer than anyone knows. My mother told me stories of how the house was used as a place for families to take post-mortem photographs with their deceased loved ones, almost like a funeral home. However, that was long ago, and the farmhouse was now used to live in. Due to the strange history of the house, there was always some speculation of it being haunted. My mother's aunt told us a story about how her grandmother would talk to someone in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. But these were just experiences from other people. After hearing about this, my uncle decided to investigate for himself. Just some insight. This farm is 2 hours away from us in a very old town. The next time my uncle visited, he went inside and took some photos and was shocked at the results. He showed us a picture where in the corner of the kitchen you can make out a black figure in the corner. This was small compared to what we would discover. Forward to around a couple months later, we go down to the farm for a holiday, as we do every year. We all talked about how we were going to go into the house and check things out because why not? The house had not been occupied in some time due to the condition of the roof and floors being very fragile. My uncle gathers a crowd of around 7 family members who had saw the photo. Our plan was to first find the corner of the room and take another photo, but on my dad's professional camera. A very expensive piece of equipment. He goes to take a photo of the spot and the camera doesn't work. He keeps trying but nothing happens. So we go outside to figure it out, and the second my dad walks outside and tries to take a photo, it works. So we were all pretty confused. We walk back in, the camera doesn't work again. This was obviously pretty freaky but nothing too serious. Until my aunt out of nowhere goes, "OWW," and yells at her daughter that she scratched her. But my cousin exclaims to her that she never even touched her. We look at her forearm, and there is a long scratch going down her arm. After this, we walk out onto the porch again, just to see if everyone was okay, and if anybody wanted to stop. My aunt obviously didn't want to continue, because she was freaked out to the core. All of a sudden, while we were standing there, this old vacuum just falls down and breaks. Nobody was even near it, but this could have just been the wind or something else. So we continue back inside after standing there just talking about everything. Eerie. We start walking through the rest of the house. Nothing too exciting happening other than the fear in our heads. It's the basement. Just me and my dad walk down while the others stay up top, and it was a very eerie way down. I shine my flashlight into the very dark basement with no lights, because the electricity hadn't worked in years. I shine to my right and see a concrete wall with a giant hole in it. No idea why, but it was just weird to see and is engraved in my head. And to this day, I always wondered what was in it. I shine my light to the left and see very old-fashioned jar bottles and stuff everywhere. My grandfather, for some reason, loved collecting jars. So me and my dad are now sitting there just looking at stuff and talking out to something, asking to show us a sign if they are there. After about 30 seconds of no reply or sign, we head up. Not even 2 steps later, a glass bottle comes flying and smashing the wall behind us. Me and my dad both froze and just stared at each other before we ultimately bolted out of the house. My father was never a ghost believer until that day. He even told me that he never believed, but he believed that something was in that house and didn't want us there. We all discussed after this to not do that again, and we later realized that it was almost like whatever was in there targeted those who weren't in the family by blood. For instance, The scratch was on my aunt's arm, who was not blood, and my father was closest to the jar that was thrown, who is not by blood, obviously, on my mother's side. You can take this story how you will. Let me know what you think. To this day, I am a firm believer in spirits. Story 9. A conversation using a K2 EMF. Recently, I posted about meeting an old lady at a bus stop. This time, I want to tell you about a 15-minute conversation I had with a ghost in my home on the 25th of January this year. It all started with my mother noticing one of our cats staring at the same spot all the time a little after 10 p.m. The cat was staring at the doorway to the living room, which wasn't unusual because I usually have a tag-along ghost watching me from doorways. I decided to pick up our EMF reader and see if anyone was in the doorway. About the EMF, we have had varied results. Some ghosts, seemingly the ones who aren't usually in the house, often spike the EMF up to red while we're talking to them. The ones in the house have low and varied strength. My grandfather usually spikes the EMF up to yellow, while the old lady who lived in our house before us doesn't want to talk and only spikes it to lime. Anyway, I started the conversation by telling the spirit that the machine in my hand wasn't dangerous and managed to get a hit in the spot where our cat had stared. The ghost seemed to still be afraid as it retreated further and further into a corner away from me. So I told it again that the machine wasn't dangerous, and the only thing that happened was that a light blinked if it stood near it. This time, the ghost responded to me and was seemingly a visiting ghost, since the EMF spiked to red. I don't remember exactly what I said, so I can't give you a transcript, but after a few questions, I confirmed that the ghost wasn't related to my family but instead to the family that lived in the house before us. After a few more questions, with control questions in between, I learned that I spoke with the eldest daughter of the man and woman who previously owned the house. Her name was Anna Brigida, and she had been visiting the house since her deceased mother had her birthday the day before. She told me that while she couldn't see her mother in the house, even though I knew she was there, she could see her father, my tag-along, sometimes, and could also see my grandfather and granduncles. I learned that she had moved to Stockholm later in life and had died of old age somewhere after 2012 at 75 to 80 years old. She felt lonely and was so excited to talk to someone that her spikes on the EMF always went to red and always answered my questions. When I asked if she was glad someone talked to her, the EMF went haywire and spiked to red over and over again until I had calmed her down. This was by far the best conversation I've had with a ghost using an EMF so far. Story 10. Something in the shadows. When I was 17, I joined the Army. I was sent to southern Georgia for basic training and infantry school. At the time that I was in, the base that I was on was entirely combat arms training. Infantry school, airborne school, ranger school, etc. It's important you know this because I enlisted during a time when the Army was still practicing archaic, conservative restrictions such as don't ask, don't tell, not allowing transgender persons in at all, and not allowing women in combat arms. All stupid and useless restrictions. But my disagreements with the Army are a topic for another time. The point is, this base was an isolated facility, more or less exclusively occupied by male soldiers. Near the end of infantry school, I fractured both of my shins and was given 3 choices: medical discharge, stay in but move to more of a desk-type job, or go to physical therapy and rehabilitation program, PTRP, to heal and try again. I chose the latter. PTRP was on a different part of the base. It was a little removed, and the drill sergeants were more focused on our healing and rehabilitation than our training and hardening. Consistent throughout my time in the Army was a duty called Fire Watch. Fire Watch is a guard shift that, despite its name, has less to do with the prevention and response to fires breaking out in the barracks, and more to do with preventing guys from running away, assaulting each other, or trying to commit suicide. Charming, right? So as it would go, you and your bunkmate, commonly referred to as your battle buddy, or simply battle, would be assigned an hour or 2 of watch at some point throughout the night, and the assignments moved down the bunk roster. There were always 2 of us, one guarding the door and the other silently roving, making sure nothing and no one was out of place. One night, my battle buddy and I pulled watch between 2 and 3 in the morning. It started out as any other watch battle took his spot on the door while I roved. Now there was this corner of the barracks, opposite from the door, past the 4 rows of bunks, and it was notoriously creepy. In daylight, the other soldiers would whisper about it, but all anyone could really muster was that it was exceptionally dark and unsettling. Most guys used a flashlight while roving on fire watch, but that always woke me up and I hated it. So while I roved, I left my flashlight off, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dark and hopefully not interrupting the sleep of my fellow soldiers. As I made my way through the rows of bunks, I turned the corner on the last row, the row farthest from the door, That corner was exceptionally dark, the kind of thick darkness that goes beyond being devoid of light. It had an unnatural density. This was more than emptiness. This was the kind of darkness that contained something within it. Something from beyond the veil, a kind of beckoning. That was the first impression I had as I made my way down the rows, closer to the corner. Something was building inside me. Every step closer to that corner, I felt more dread seeping up into my body. How rain will crawl up your pants legs from the foot. Cold and invasive. I was only about 5 bunks down out of about 30 to 40. Every slow, silent step forward was spent not observing the bunks, but locked on that corner. I became absolutely certain of 2 things. First, was that there was something in that corner that I couldn't see, but couldn't look away from. And second, its gaze was fixed on me as well, and made me feel hollow. This realization caused the hair all over my body to stand on end, and terror washed over me, pulling me in like gravity. I felt as if every atom in my body was screaming to get away, screaming against its pull while my feet stepped closer as if no longer under my control. This sensation filling up inside me is hard to explain. Do you ever get a feeling, deep in your bones, an understanding beyond thought? A sudden realization that what you are feeling is an absolute truth? That shadow creature just emanated a pulsing feeling and being of sinister wrong. I mean, the most wrong anything has ever felt in my life. I had to get away from it. Finally, my feet were my own again, and I decided at that point it was time to join my battle buddy by the door. After very slowly backing out of the row, never turning away from the corner, I thought I would feel better once I got away. I was wrong. The shadow's awareness seemed to remain fixed on me, following me in the darkness that stretched across the ceiling until I reached my friend. At first, I wasn't sure if I would tell the other guy about this. I mean, what could I say? Its inability to be spoken of was a part of the haunting feeling. The shadow had me. I was vulnerable and isolated in its darkness. It claimed me. I tried to shake it off and quietly started a conversation with Battle. Just as I was beginning to feel okay, we heard something that couldn't have been there. The small, soft, almost angelic voice of a child called for its daddy. From outside the very door we stood guard. Daddy. Benign as it sounds, it's almost 3 in the morning on a training base. Not only should there not be children here, but certainly not awake and looking for their daddy. This was all wrong. My bunkmate and I stared at each other. I asked if he heard that. He says yes, and asked if I heard it. I say yes. We stare at each in silence for a moment before I say the stupidest thing possible. We have to check. I can see on my friend's face that he absolutely hates me right now, his eyes pleading with me not to. I don't blame him, because as I reach for the door handle, I'm hating this decision too. If there is somehow a kid out there, we have to try to help. Slowly, I turn the handle, ready to open the door. I wait, and with our eyes fixed on each other, we count 1, 2, 3. We open the door and bob our heads in and out as quickly as though they might get shot off. Nothing. An empty field. We locked eyes again, but before we could say anything next, a sound filled our ears. Child's laughter, no longer angelic, but a mischievous, wicked giggle, surrounded us. I watched as my friend's eyes gaped with horror and dread washed over his face. No doubt he saw the same in me. As we stood there with ice in our veins, there was no need to ask if each other heard it that time. We locked the door. We stood next to each other completely still and in total silence for the remainder of our guard shift, then woke the next 2 to take over without saying a thing about any of it. In fact, we never spoke of it again. I wonder if, wherever he is, it still haunts him too. I cannot explain what we encountered, but whatever was with us that night, it manipulated our emotions, delighted in frightening us, made a meal of our fear. Plantation ghost. For a description of this place, it is dusk in this green, stereotypical-looking plantation house like a mile away from my house. My grandparents' friend owned this land, and there is also a graveyard on the property with graves where the newest grave was 1930s, like old place. And I hear this baby crying and look behind me, and I see this gray-colored girl in a dress that looked like the dress that a house slave would wear, and she looked like she was African-American holding a baby and just walks off. I was scared, but over time forgot, and lately I looked up the address on a land history website, and it said that a family died in 1832 where the wife went crazy, locked the doors, and burnt down the house, and 11 house slaves died, and 3 of which were teenage African-American things. Story 12. I heard a voice. I haven't experienced some paranormal stuff for like a decade or 2. Between my sister and I, my sister has more experiences/stories to tell. Back in our country, we lived in a compound where there's plenty of unexplained happenings, like one of our delivery trucks was blaring its horn at nearly 3 a.m., waking all of us up. Its engine was off and there's nobody around. Employees go home at 5 p.m. My husband and my brother took the battery out. This happened like 2 to 3x until they decided to have the truck parked somewhere else other than our compound. However, we never experienced anything creepy at own house, maybe BCOS. We have dogs around our side. Old people believe they ward off ghosts. IDK, how true, is forward to the present. We're now in Canada, but we don't have our own house yet, so we're just renting, and the kitchen is shared between us and the owners. So, last night as I was cooking dinner, my kimchi pancake on the stove, I prepared the sauce when suddenly, I heard a girl's voice saying, "Hi there, Auntie." When I turned around to see who it was, BCOS, the voice was not familiar to me. No one was there. I went to check the living room, and the homeowner's youngest child was there. So I asked him if he just said hi to me. He said no and continued playing us. So I assumed maybe it was the other daughter. While I was eating my dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see it was the other daughter. So, it wasn't her. I thought this time, maybe it's the older one. Mind you, the daughters would always greet me whenever we see each other. Then when I was cleaning up the kitchen, the eldest daughter went to get something to eat. I asked her if she went in the kitchen and if she said hi to me. She answered, "No, I was in my room." When I first heard the voice, I thought maybe it was a classmate of theirs who slept over BCOS. The voice is not familiar to me, and the way it spoke was gentle. Now, I don't know if she'd get scared or just shrug it off. The history of this house is that it was formerly a school that was established in 1800s and was closed in the 1950s. I don't know what to make of what I heard the last night. I can still recall the voice I heard. It was so clear. Do you have any experiences like this? Story 13. Turns out it wasn't sleep paralysis. A few years ago, I got woken up in the middle of the night by a vibrating afterimage in the shape of a hand. I got freaked out by that, and in instinct, sat up straight, rubbed my eyes, then opened them. The afterimage left. On the far right corner on my bed, though, was a The Ring-style looking woman sitting with her legs folded, the only difference in her appearance being that her hair didn't cover up her face, so I could see her glowing white eyes. Note that I've never even seen the movie before. Still haven't. She was staring at me. I then, in Christian instinct, frickin' recited a verse from the Bible. She then covered up her ears, tilted her head backwards and inaudibly screamed. After that, she sort of faded away and was gone. Oh. I wasn't scared at all when that happened for some reason though, probably because I wasn't completely awake at that time. Also, yay. I know it sounds fake and cheesy, which is why I wrote it off as simply sleep paralysis, and that woman was just my sleep paralysis demon. But it just doesn't make any sense for it to be sleep paralysis, since I moved a lot during that encounter. Also note that I don't remember this wrong, since I wrote down what happened the day it did. My little sister also told me that she has seen that woman before, in the far back of her bed, crawling towards her when she woke up in the middle of the night, and that she left when she closed her eyes. We sleep in the same bed, by the way, a bunk bed, so it seems like she likes our bed LMAO. My mom also told me that she's seen that same woman in the corner of the living room for a split second. Also, this isn't the only ghost sighting I've had. A year before this happened, I saw the silhouette of a little girl with a ponytail running from left to right at the end of the hallway. It happened in the middle of the night when I went to go to drink some water. Another time was when I was in bed and saw the silhouette of a tall man in the doorway past the hallway. Yay, this all happened in Germany, by the way, where, well, tons of war happened and loads of PPL probably died right where I live, so that's probably it. IDK. Story 14. Whispers in the Snow. It was winter in Kashmir, the kind of winter where the world turns white and quiet, like nature's holding its breath. I was on my way to a remote village. What for? Work? Adventure? Honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. All I remember is the cold, biting, and unforgiving, and how the snow seemed to swallow every sound. I found this house. It wasn't much, but it was better than freezing to death outside. At least, that's what I told myself. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and something faintly metallic. Man, I tried not to think about it. For a while, it felt safe. The fire crackled, the snowstorm raged outside, and for the first time in hours, I could feel my fingers again. I even started to relax. Maybe too much. That's when I saw a shadow, just there, against the wall. I told myself it was nothing, just the fire playing tricks on me. But I had that feeling. Someone is watching me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I swear I heard footsteps. Not outside, inside, slow, deliberate, like someone didn't want to wake me, but wanted me to know they were there. There was nothing, just an empty room and my own stupid imagination. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the unease wouldn't go away. Finally, I decided to step outside to clear my head. That's when I saw them, the footprints in the snow outside. They weren't mine. The prints led away from the house, into the trees. They were fresh, too fresh. And they weren't going anywhere. They just stopped, right in the middle of the clearing, like whoever made them vanished into thin air. I didn't want to go back out. Whatever was out there. I don't know what happened next. The light went out, and I heard a whisper, baxed, right next to my ear. It said my name. How did it know my name? I ran. I didn't look back. Not once. Even now, I can't tell you what I saw or heard that night. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it wasn't. But if you ever find yourself alone in the snow, and you feel like you're being watched, don't stay. Just run. 15. My dog saw a ghost. Once lived in a house that I'm convinced was haunted. I never saw a ghost, but I had a puppy, and he constantly acted like someone else was in the room with us. It was an old one-story house that wasn't nice, but I was young, living on my own for the first time, and was working in a small town. Most landlords didn't allow pets, but one did, so I put up with the old house so I could get a dog. He was a shy Labrador mix who was very reserved and wary of people, likely due to abuse, but he quickly warmed up to me. There were 3 instances that I can still recall to this day, 20+ years later, that terrified me. One night I was sitting in my chair watching TV while my dog lay at my feet chewing on a rawhide bone. The house had an L-shaped open concept. Kitchen led to dining room, and then the living room to the right. All of a sudden, my dog stopped chewing on his bone, stared into the dining room, and started growling. He never made noise in the house, so I was surprised. Then the barking started. Low at first, then building in intensity. I sat frozen in the chair, wondering what he was looking at, and trying to calm him down. Eventually, he stopped and went back to chewing on his bone. I brushed this off to his different personality because I didn't want to think I was living in a haunted house. One night, I woke in the middle of the night to my dog pacing and growling beside my bed. I told him to be quiet and lie down. I heard him drop something. That's weird, I thought. The door was shut, and I purposely kept his toys out of the bedroom when I went to sleep. It was a rope toy that he had no interest in unless someone held it and pulled him around the room. It was almost as if someone was tugging at one end and playing with him. I told myself I was letting my imagination run wild and to forget it. The last instance was the worst. One night I was getting ready for bed while he was out in the yard before going to bed. Suddenly, I heard him barking loudly. I thought there must be a dog on the sidewalk. Happened before. So I went to the dining room window to look. It was a floor-to-ceiling window that I put sheaths over that were pretty useless. You could pretty much see right inside, but I was young and trying to decorate. Anyway, I pushed the sheaths aside to get a good view of what he was barking at, and I jumped. He was standing right at the window, staring back into the house, ears perked up and hair on his back standing up. He stopped barking, looked up at me, then stepped to the right and looked around me and continued barking. I whirled around, expecting to see somebody behind me, but no one was there. Heart pounding, I froze. My dog kept barking. I was staring into the kitchen wondering if someone had broken in and was now hiding by the back door or in the bathroom that was off the kitchen. It took every ounce of courage I had, but I charged the kitchen, grabbing a frying pan on the way, fully ready to confront whoever was in the house. But there was nobody there. I let my dog in. He quickly charged a few feet in, froze, stared in the kitchen for a few moments, then relaxed and went and lied down. That last one was it. I started looking for a new place to live the next day, and we moved about a month later. Could all of these instances be rationally explained? Absolutely. But that dog lived another 9 years, and he never behaved the way he did in that house ever again. 16. Tenpenny Bridge. When I was 14 and my sister was 16, we went to high school in a small Indiana town, Ponce. This was back in the AOL days of the early 2000s. There wasn't much to do there, and we were often left on our own. So naturally, we got into trouble and made plenty of mischief. My sister and I have always been pretty good friends, and I helped her cheat in French, which has nothing to do with this story, but it's fun. Well, one evening we decided to do a search of local spooky and haunted places. We found a few and resolved to check them out the next night with 2 friends of ours who are also brother and sister. We'll call them Samantha and Steve. So the following evening, my sister, me, Sam, and Steve pile into my mom's car. Off we were to go ghost hunting, armed with only a list of a few locations, Ouija board, flashlights, and 10 pennies. The 10 pennies were for a specific location, Tenpenny Bridge, a kind of local folktale that read similar to the Jersey Devil, various goat men, and the like. And as such, we reserved that one for around midnight. We hit up a few supposed haunted locations, but got nothing. It didn't matter though. We were just kids out being kids. Felix. We were having fun. By the time we got around to Tenpenny Bridge, we were feeling plenty skeptical and fearless. We drove for what seemed like ages to reach what we decided was the exact location of the middle of nowhere. Granted, much of Indiana felt that way. Finally, we found it. 10-penny Bridge. All we knew about this spot was that it is supposedly haunted by a vagrant man who was killed there. Perhaps only having 10 pennies to his name at the time, but that part was unclear. Anywho, the story goes, if you park and turn off your car and headlights in the middle of the bridge and place 10 pennies in a row on the guardrail, actually a concrete block, your car will stall and the pennies will either be moved or missing. This seemed like an easy one to try, so there we were. We got out of the car, stretched our legs, and set our 10 pennies on the guardrail in a straight, neat row. Then, not knowing how long it might take, we meandered about, talking and joking. I think it was Steve who called us back to show us that the 2 pennies on the right end of the line had been pushed aside about an inch. We weren't sure about it, deciding that any of us, including Steve, could have moved them while we were all scattered about. We decided to move them back, and all stood on the other side of the car facing each other for 5 minutes before checking again. We stood talking, Steve and I leaning against the car, Sam and my sister facing us. Suddenly there was a flick and a ringing. The sound of a penny spinning through the air between my head and Steve's, and the all too familiar bounce of a coin on the pavement. It would seem that someone or something had thrown a penny over to us. We froze. After what seemed like 20 minutes, but was probably 20 seconds, we moved as a group to investigate the pennies on the bridge. Then, we saw it. Pennies arranged like the panicked line of a heart monitor in cardiac arrest, predicting our own panic. Compelling it. Some of the pennies were pulled to the very edge, barely balancing on the rail. I cannot tell you how difficult it was for us to pile into the car fast enough. We literally ran around it in circles like an episode of Scooby-Doo, before finally getting everyone inside and stalling. My sister, who is a fine driver, I will have you know, tried and stalled the car 3 times before it started, and we peeled out. After about 2 miles, we stopped screaming, and she pulled over. We gathered ourselves, and my sister, of all people, suggested we go back. Well, she was driving, so off we went. Arriving back at the bridge, we found all 10 pennies back in a neat, straight line. We promptly left, leaving the pennies behind. Very smites. The next morning, all 4 of us woke to find that we were sleeping on a penny. More than 20 years later, my sister and I still talk about the 10-penny bridge. Story 17. Ghost car? Many years ago, my friend, call him A, was driving another friend, B, and I home. The car was traveling on the expressway, again. Because it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, the expressway was very quiet, and we were one of the few vehicles on the road. Suddenly, Al remarked to us, "Wow, the light inside that car is so bright. How can the driver be able to see the road out there if it's so bright inside the car?" I looked out but saw no cars around us within seeing distance. I had pegged too that I was too tired, hence didn't spot the car. We all got home safely that night. A couple of days later in a conversation, friend A asked us if we had noticed that car which had such bright lights inside the car. When B, who was then in the front passenger seat, also said no, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He told us that he felt it was strange that the car was lit so brightly inside, yet he could see only one dark shadow or silhouette at the driver's seat. He said he couldn't make out any details of the driver. The even more strange observation was that the car seemed to be going in slow motion, but was just next to our car that night. I decided not to push the theory that A had a supernatural encounter. Later that day, when A gave B and I a lift home that afternoon, I noticed that a religious pendant that usually hangs at A's front rear view mirror was gone. When I asked A about it, he said that he noticed that the pendant was cracked that morning, and he laughingly asked if any of us had broke it. To this day, I still hold the theory that the religious pendant probably kept us safe from the ghost car that A had encountered that night. Story 18. Need help. Sighting of a disembodied arm and a cryptic warning whisper. I have a personal relationship with a boy that I have helped for many years, since he was born. Smesties. I am like his big uncle, and he always rely on me for when things are tough. He yesterday sent me a pic of something that happened to him. Tried to seek help elsewhere, but no such help was forthcoming. I am open to supernatural beliefs, but my little ahijado called me today very distraught and sent me this pic. He mentioned he was sleeping early, and around perhaps 11 p.m., he woke up when someone was whispering on his ear, "Be careful," in Spanish. He took a pic of the darkness as he felt a heavy presence in the room, and all he got was that picture. You can see he is on his bed, and next to him, a disembodied skeletal arm shows. I don't know what this means, or how I can help him. I tried to Google around, but beyond some European folklore mentions of disembodied hands or arms serving as warnings, got nothing much. Any help or guidance would be helpful. This happened in Miami, Florida. My poor ahijado is scared. He is a simple baker boy in a pastry shop, lives with his mom, and has never been on drugs or anything weird. He rarely has a social life. Thank you for reading All I want is guidance and something to comfort him or help him understand the warning. Story 19. Ghost Story Experience. This happened around when I was maybe 12 to 13. I am 27 now. It was around midnight, and me and my siblings were with our day, who used to be a driver. He had to drop someone off at a church that was built in the 1800s because he worked as security to guard it overnight so people don't try to come in and steal anything. It was a typical horror movie type church with old portrait paintings along the wall. It was a 4-story church, super big. Me, my dad, and siblings went inside the church with him because he wanted to give us a short tour. He showed us around the whole building, and nothing unusual happened. I did ask the guy, was the place haunted, as a joke in the beginning or the tour? And he laughed and said, yeah, it was, but he was hoping nobody would ask. He said that it was a ton in the basement. Toward the end of the tour, my dad was signing the guest book and chatting with him. While I was waiting for them to finish, I look over down the sanctuary hallways and see a ton of shadow figures roaming in the sanctuary. It was light down the hallway, but the sanctuary was pitch black. Like I could see the entire silhouette of people from head to toe, but just shadows. One was even waving at me. They were literally in the middle of the hallway, and the shadows weren't cast on the wall. So I looked away and thought maybe I'm fooling myself, and looked back, and they were still there walking around. I blinked a million times, I turned my back, and they were still there. As an adult now, I believe it was a lot of residual energy type ghost. Story 20. Saying goodbye? This story is not about sleep paralysis, although it has some elements that could be attributed to it. This all happened on January 1st, 1996. I had come home from college for winter break for the first time since starting school. It was good to be home. On New Year's Eve, my brother and I went to a party at a friend's house, not too far from ours. We ended up partying until the early hours of the next day, had a few drinks, but mostly had a great time chatting with people I had not seen in a while. It was a little bit after dawn when we finally walked back home. Once we got there, my mom was up in the kitchen making some breakfast. It was a bit unusual that she would be up this early on a holiday, but I did not think much of it at the time. After chit-chatting for a bit, I made my way to my bedroom, got out of my clothes and into bed. My bedroom was small, so it was quite cramped. As you opened the door and walked in, the first thing you would see, right in front of you, would be a large dresser with a rectangular mirror, a hand-me-down from when my parents got new furniture. The dresser took up most of the space. To its right, you would find a small desk with the old-school Panasonic alarm clock that everyone seemed to own at one point or another, with a red LED display. Right in front of the desk, there would be my single bed. The bed was set up in such a way that I could always see the time on the alarm clock and the mirror when I was lying there. As I was beginning to drift away, a strong wind paralyzed me. I could hear its howling in my ears, and I shut my eyes as a reflex. Here is where the story, I believe, differs from sleep paralysis, which I have also experienced several times. After what seemed to be an eternity under the effect of this wind, I managed to open my eyes. Through the mirror, I could see an entity standing in front of the door. It was dark, so I could not make out any facial features. It was human in form, but it had a deformed head, its shape indescribable, and I was scared. Although I could open my eyes, I could not move my head to look at the entity. I could only look in the direction my head already was. Then, I clearly noticed that the time on the alarm clock went from 6:14 a.m. to 6:15 a.m. A few seconds later, as sudden as it had come, the wind and the entity disappeared, and I regained my mobility. I tried to make sense of what had happened, but I did not get up. After calming down, I went back to sleep and did not wake up until midday. When I woke up, the memory of the earlier event was still fresh. I shrugged it off as a bad dream, but it bothered me that I distinctly remembered the time in the alarm clock changing. To my surprise, when I went to the kitchen to grab some food, my mom and stepdad were there, all dressed up. That is when my mom announced that my great aunt, who had been battling cancer for some time, had passed away the previous night, and that they were heading for the funeral. I was saddened by the news. I had not been close to her, but I was close to her younger son, who was around my age, and with her husband, my great-uncle, who was a successful executive, and someone I had always looked up to. I told my parents that I wanted to go to the funeral. Since they were in no rush, I had breakfast, then showered, and put on a shirt and tie, and then we left for the funeral home. When we got there, I noticed that they had an open casket, and people were going over to it to pay their respects. I had been to several open casket funerals before, but the only other time I had mustered the courage to look at the deceased person was when I went to my elementary school principal's funeral, several years before. After greeting some relatives and friends, I made my way to the casket. And there, I got the big shock. Due to the cancer treatment, my great aunt had lost her hair, So she was wearing an elaborate head wrap with flowers on it. Its layout was the same as I had seen on the entity earlier that day. It made sense. I prayed for a few minutes over her casket and said my goodbyes. I was quite disturbed and shocked, so I did not stay for the rest of the funeral and headed home. I replayed the morning's incident in my mind over and over. Did my great-aunt visit me to say goodbye? It was strange that she would have, since we were not close, as I had mentioned before. What about the wind? Could it be sleep paralysis that coincided with her visitation? So many doubts to this day. To be honest, I was scared when it happened. I have gone through many paranormal events in my life, but I had been calm and not felt fear, for lack of a better word, from the experiences. That morning, on New Year's Day, 1996, I was afraid. Story 21. Loud crack right in front of me. This just happened, and I'm scrambling for answers. I live in a third-floor apartment in NYC. I was sitting on the couch watching TV in the apartment alone when an extremely loud crack happened right in front of me. It just about hurt my ears, kind of on the level of a single firecracker. My first thought was that it was electrical. It sounded similar to a shorted circuit. There's no smell, no smoke. All the electronics are working fine. Texted the neighbor downstairs to make sure I'm not crazy, and she said it sounded like something heavy dropped on my floor above her, and I'm on the other side of the building, so it was that loud. With my hair standing on end, I'm hunting for any evidence of the sound and can't find anything. My finance comes home moments later for a short while before having to run out to an event. In the area the noise happened, I noticed her hair raising like static electricity. It started to remind me of how people describe the environment right before being struck by lightning. Previous ghostly info. Chem Simpsonabus. This morning, same day, fiancé sees a roll of aluminum foil get thrown onto the floor off a shelf on its own. Maybe a month ago, a photo of my father and my uncle who passed away 4 years ago had fallen and partially broken. It was not in a precarious position. Last night, had dinner with family and met my aunt's new boyfriend, and he seems to be not that great. Hunch. Ghost of uncle might be trying to get my attention because he's mad about the new boyfriend. Question. Are there any accounts of this loud kind of electrical discharge by anyone else, and can it be connected to anything paranormal? Or do I need the landlord to send an inspector to make sure the electrical and structural elements of the apartment are sound? Story 22. The Haunted House. It's been years and none of us really acknowledge what happened, but I talked to my brother about it yesterday and decided to share the story when I came across this group. I'm going to share a few of the things I saw myself. Background. I was 19F at the time, my ex-best friend was 20 meters. My friend I call my brother 25 meters, cousin 21F, who is going to be Peach, and it was two brothers named B1 and B2. One male we're going to call T, and one female we're going to call S, whose ages I don't remember. We're renting rooms in a big house in Brandywine, MD. The house was owned by the brother's godfather, so we didn't pay much luckily. This was during the pandemic, so we were home more than usual, and I wasn't visiting home much. 2 hours away, due to restrictions and not wanting to get my elderly family sick. Me and my ex-BF were in the male roommate's room. They were playing the game while I was OTP and smoking with them. Don't do drugs, kids. We were the only ones home since everyone else was at work and my cousin was running errands with my brother. The room door slowly opens and we all freeze, especially me, BC. I'm sitting on the floor close to the door. T told me stop playing. I said I didn't do it in a shaky tone. Then all three of us ran across the hall to me and ex-BF room. While closing the door, we see one of the breakfast bar chairs on the steps, and that sealed the deal for me that glasses, we called one of the ghost glasses BC, he wore glasses and was mean, was definitely messing with us. T then says he left his phone. We told him not to go get it, but he does. When he opens the door, the chair is now in the middle of the hallway. Oh! I started praying. I was terrified. We ended up barricading the door and falling asleep eventually. The chair was back at the breakfast bar when B1 came home later that night, early the next morning after we had fallen asleep. Everyone except brother is home, and it was a bad storm going on. The power was on, but our service went out on our phones, and the chat feature for the games didn't work. Then the power goes out. So we all go downstairs in the living room to see if anyone else's power is out, but the other houses still had lights on. Now we all start to get antsy. BFFB. Second T. Then go to the front door to open it and see if the storm is really that bad to only knock out our power, but the door wouldn't open. We all eventually tried to open the door. IT wouldn't open. I again start to pray because I'm terrified. I mean, close to crying. Everyone is panicking and trying to open the patio door won't budge, and then the basement door opens. We are not allowed in the basement per the owner's request. I ran upstairs and got the Sage BC. Absolutely not. Glasses, go back down there and leave us alone. I can't find the sage, so I have my crystals and start saying the Lord's Prayer ATP. I'm terrified about to piss myself. We are all in the living room together, BC. We are scared to separate. Then brother comes in. We tell him don't close the door, but he does. We quickly run everything down to him, and he laughs. Then goes to open the door. It wasn't opening. The power cuts back on as I finish the prayer to myself for the third time, and the door finally opens, and our phones finally work again. I called my mom, BC. I was shooketh. 3. We broke the basement rule, so this is our fault, LMFAO, but still scared us. Me, Peaches, and ex-BFF are in the basement. Watched Once Upon a Time on Peaches' TV. We had Peaches' baby shower the day prior and brought the TV down there. We all ended up falling asleep, which was strange. BC, none of us were sleepy whatsoever. Fight. We wake up. Continue watching the show. Some time passes, and the door in the basement to the part no one can go into for whatever reason opens slowly on its own. We all look at each other, if you're black YK the look, and jetted up the steps. Peach made it first, then me, and then ex-BFF. We ran up the basement steps, then the winding steps to where our rooms are, and went to Peach room. I never stepped foot in the basement again. I was too scared to do so. 4. Not really something that happened, but I was sleeping on my bed and I was extremely hot. Unusual? BC. I'm anemic. I'm always cold. Ex-BFF usually has the fan on in the room. BC. He gets hot easily, so I assumed he turned it off. I opened my eyes, and glasses jumps at me, full on jumps at me. I thought I was gonna fall through my bed. I got up, went to his bed, got the remote for the TV BC. I knew I was not going back to sleep. I eventually did, but I don't remember falling asleep. That house is the house we do not speak about whatsoever. We all moved out and went our own ways. I only talk to brother now. Everyone else I either wasn't close to, so we didn't keep in touch after the move, or I fell out with them. That house definitely changed T and ex-BFF. They just seemed different and off after living in that house. We have a few theories, but we won't even be able to find out why it was so many different spirits attached to the home. I hope the new owners like roommates. Story 23. My experiences after my dad passed away. I'm 32 now, but this happened when I was 13. So, my father, who was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive to me and my family, had a heart attack in my family house a couple of days after Christmas. He slipped into a coma for 2 weeks before he died on January 10th. Shortly after he died, a couple of strange things happened. I would get creepy feelings around the house like I wasn't alone, even though I was at times. Like either somebody was watching me, or I could feel somebody's presence near me. I would especially get these feelings at night, or in the basement especially. Another thing that happened was that I could see shadow figures in my peripheral vision at times. They were all black, and I would see them either in my father's office, or my mother's bedroom, or in the family room when I was watching TV. They would either just stand there and watch me, or slowly move around and approach me. If I turned to face them, they would quickly duck down behind furniture and disappear. Another weird thing that happened was that personal items of mine like keys or chapstick or small things would go missing for days or weeks at a time before reappearing again. I would leave my keys on a place like my desk or my cabinet, where I would easily see them or locate them. I would seriously make a mental note of where I left them, and if I went to school or went out for a couple of hours and came back, they would be gone. Then they wind up days or weeks later in an obvious location in my room that I already checked. Like I would check my room top to bottom and I would not find them. My chapstick would reappear on my desk, and I swore I checked my desk dozens of times for it, and they weren't there before. This was strange, because my mom or my sister would have no reason to take my stuff, especially mundane, small things that didn't really matter. I was only in that house for only a few months later because my mother, on her own, couldn't afford the mortgage, and we had to move out shortly after. Guess what? After we moved, no more shadow figures, creepy feelings, or missing items. I would like to point out I have no history of visual or audio hallucinations. I'm somebody who will always look for the most logical explanation first, and I consider myself a skeptic first before I turn to a paranormal explanation. Yet, this was the first time I encountered something that I seriously couldn't explain. These experiences truly made me more open-minded to ghosts and spirits and unexplained phenomena. Thank you for reading, if you made it this far. Story 24. Working with a ghost? I had gotten called into a shift at work. I only had to work 6:30 to 10 o'clock, so it wasn't too bad, but it still felt really long. We were really slow. Anyways, my best friend and I had a shift together, so of course we chit-chat when no one was around. She was working deli, and I was at the register. Well, I ended up needing the bathroom, so I had her cover register for me. My legs were hurting pretty bad, so I sat in there for a few minutes in silence. I heard the door start to wiggle like someone was trying to open it, so I yelled out, "Wrong bathroom!" And it stopped. A customer bathroom key is really loud because it has a metal piece on it, so I would have heard it if it was picked up. I never heard anything. The door once again started to wiggle, this time more aggressively. I immediately texted my friend on Snapchat to see if it was her messing with me, and it wasn't. So I got up and went out. Not a sole customer in the store. I was a little freaked out, but this is when it started getting really weird. It was like 7:30 to 8 o'clock, and it was really windy out. We were talking to each other at the register because there was no one in the store. All of a sudden, the office door slams shut. Not a breeze in the store, no one in sight, just us. You have to physically shut the door for it to close. And it slammed. She has left for the night at 9 o'clock, and I was alone for about an hour. So I started doing my coffees, which involves me going to the kitchen to dump them in the sink. Anyways, I'm dumping coffees when I hear a loud crash out in the store, so I ran out to find nothing. So I went to go back into the kitchen, and the sink was running, which I didn't turn on in the first place. At this point, I started to get angry. I yelled out, "Whoever or whatever is messing with me, stop, it's not funny." And the store went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, so I put on some music to ease the quiet. 9:55 rolled around, and I started to close down. I was counting down my drawer when I heard a crash come from the kitchen. I was the only one here. I had locked the door already and checked the back door. Locked. I finished my count, walked to clock out. And as I unlocked the door and put in the code to leave, I yelled out, "Leave me alone and stop! Fasterisk pecking with me!" I walked out, shut the store down, and left. Story 25. 3 is a crowd. In a hotel in a rural part of China, my friend and I went up to our room after a late dinner. When we were in our room, the receptionist called us and said, "Sorry, only 2 persons allowed in the room. You have to pay more if it's 3 packs." We told the receptionist that there are only 2 of us. Where got 3? But the receptionist insisted again that on the corridor camera she saw 3 people enter our room. I told her to come up and check if she doesn't believe. She suddenly went quiet and said she was mistaken and apologized. The next morning, my roommate told me that we should check out a face app. The whole night, he kept dreaming of a lady sitting on the chair or at his bed staring at him. After we left the hotel, he told me he felt and heard someone behind us following us back to hotel. But every time he turned around, there was no one. Story 26. The Golden Goat Man. As a child, I fell out of bed, and what I saw horrified me so much, I jumped back into bed and tried to sleep it away. I can only describe it as a demonic fawn man that was bright gold and had bad vibes. He hunched over, facing my door. There's no way a child under 6 could imagine that, surely. Like I was a wild kid, but not that way. I've never seen him since, but he haunts me a little. The room has bad vibes anyway. Everyone who's ever been in it has said that. Even though I don't tell the story anymore and haven't after being accused of just dreaming it. I've tried to post this in other places, but it's always taken down, so this is my last hope of gaining any conversation about it. What are your guys' thoughts, as I'm open to any explanation? Thanks for watching. Sleep tight, or maybe not. Subscribe for more ghostly stories.